Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha Priti, and I am here with a group of seekers, and we are reading through the Bhagavad Gita. And we are in chapter 3, text 24. And I do want to say, if you want to join us live, you can either go to our Instagram, go to our bio. Our Instagram is Seekers Quest 108, and the links are in the bio. But Kelly, one of our listeners, messaged me yesterday and was like, oh, she just joined us. Look at that. Kelly, I was literally just talking about you. So now you could hear. She texted me yesterday and was like, maybe not everybody has Instagram. And if we want more people to join, we should, have another way. So we have an email address, seekersquest108@gmail. Thanks to Kelly. And you can email if you want the links, an easy way to get the links, or really for anything at all, feel free to email seekersquest108@gmail.com. Thank you, Kelly. And welcome, Kelly. And Maria, good to see you. And Denny just joined. Great. Okay, so like I said, we're starting in chapter 3, text 24. And we're still in the section where Krishna's telling Arjuna that we should act to set an example. And if we remember, he gave an example. He gave that example of Janaka, the prince. And then he talked about acting to set an example in principle. And then the next 3 verses, he gave himself as an example, just to further demonstrate the point of why it's important, even if you're detached from the results of the action, even if you're, especially if you're detached, but if you're renounced, if you really have no self-interest in what you're doing, we still should act to set an example. And so Krishna is like probably the best example of that in the entire existence, because he's full and complete in himself. He desires for nothing. He needs nothing from no one. He's not attached. He's not entangled, but yet he's the creator. He's the source. He's an example, the example of working in a detached manner to set an example. And in that, he, maintains the entire material manifestation. So we are on our last text of that, of him explaining that, or using himself as an example to demonstrate this point that we should act to set an example, even if we're detached. So this is 324. And in this, he says, if I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put to ruination. I would be the cause of creating an unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. So here, he's referencing Arjuna's earlier argument. If we remember back in chapter 1, one of Arjuna's arguments of his reasons not to fight, it was about unwanted progeny or bad population, right? If we recall, Arjuna's point was that if he fought, a lot of the leaders would die, and then there would be no protectors, and the vulnerable would be exploited. That was one of his reasons he didn't want to fight, and the point that he made. And here, Krishna's turning that argument around, and he's saying, if a bad example is set, if you walk away from fighting, you'll set a long-lasting precedent that is unhealthy and toxic. People will see, even though you're renounced and you don't really have any obligation to your duty anymore, people that maybe aren't so renounced will see that you walked away. You're a warrior and you walked away. And even though you're not fearful for your life, and you're doing it for quote unquote the right reasons, then other people who aren't so renounced and maybe are fearful for their lives will use it as an excuse to also walk away. And what happens if all of the warriors walk away? Right? That sets an unhealthy precedent. And other people, the warriors in the position of responsibility will feel like they can just run away as soon as things get demanding or difficult. And this will clear the way for this precedent. And at this point, you are worried about people taking power that were not qualified and taking advantage. That's exactly what would happen here. if we had no warriors to protect. So if you don't fight, that will lead to population, Krishna says. So he kind of takes his reason and he turns it around on him. Like if there's a rioting crowd and the cops run away, the rioters will continue to riot, but also the common people will be able to do even more rioting, right? So that's kind of like the example here of how that would play out if Arjuna, like this super brave, like gold standard of a warrior, decides to walk away, you know. So Krishna is telling Arjuna here that he's doing his duty. I'm doing my duty. Krishna's saying, I'm doing my duty. Therefore, you should do your duty. Because when Krishna descends to the world, he deals with all these rules and regulations for us so that we can automatically become peaceful and organized so that we can progress in spiritual life. Right? In that, he's like the father of all the living entities. And if the living entities are misguided, like any good father, he's responsible. Right? So where there's disregard, general disregard for the rules of society, the Lord descends to correct. And that's his duty. And that's the reason he does it. He has no attachment. He has no he's not entangled. He's not subject to any karma. He just comes and does it because it's his duty. So here, both Krishna and Arjuna are thinking about the future. You know, they both have kind of a long-term thought process here, but who is more accurate? You know, Krishna's telling Arjuna that if he gives up his duty, it'll lead to the very thing that he fears that he wants to avoid. So he's saying, you know, it is vital that he fights, but not to give up fighting, right? So therefore he should fight, even if it's difficult, even if his duty is difficult. And for us, you know, this is something for us to think about. Our actions are far more consequential than we realize, right? And we shouldn't just make decisions based on what we want or how we see things or how we feel, but on what are our responsibilities and how our actions will be seen by others and how our actions will impact others, right? And it's so easy in the moment to kind of make those decisions, you know, just based off of what you feel like and what you feel like doing. But Krishna's saying here, you know, we need to think more long term. We need to think farther ahead. We need to think with a more zoomed out perspective. Anybody that has like a family or children or, you know, any responsibility, really, this is kind of the point of this. This kind of trains you in this thinking. It's like all of a sudden you can't do what you just wanted to do all the time, right? It's not all about you. All of a sudden you have to think about how what I'm doing now is going to impact this person, or how this person's going to feel about what I'm doing. Or, you know, for me, it's like, oh, if I do that, when is my baby going to get to eat? That's like constantly on my mind. So it's like, and this is training us. This is why these things are good for us. You know, you get a family, you get a container of which you can navigate safely and kind of learn some of these things in a secure environment. And we can learn how to be less selfish and think farther ahead and consider how our actions impact other people. So this is kind of the pruning that's going on as we're furthering our journey and becoming more evolved is you know, we learn these things, and we learn these things in preparation for our relationship with God, with Krishna. So another point here is that the actions are far more important than words, and even more important is intentions. Right? Krishna's intentions are obvious here, right? He's not trying to puff himself up. He's not telling Arjuna like, look, I'm the perfect example. So, you know, it's not like an ego trip. Right? He's really, and he's not trying to force Arjuna into anything either. Right? He's not trying to like manipulate him into doing what he wants. He's just trying to educate and inspire him. That's the intention. And that's, again, intentions are more important than actions. And actions are more important than words. And an example we'd see around here is like if somebody donates a lot of money to charity, right? But they do it really just to gain recognition, improve their social image, receive tax benefits, right? It's not like they're really doing it with their heart. They're just doing it, which isn't bad. It's still good. But better would be person who donates to charity anonymously with the sole intention of just helping those in need, right? Because that intention itself inspires others, right? It has that ripple effect. It propagates to others see what they're doing, and they feel maybe a little bit touched, like, wow, that's really kind. And then then as more people do that, it kind of sets a standard, like, oh, this is like kind of a normal thing. Maybe I should do something. And that's kind of how this works, right? Whereas if the intention is just like for the self, if the intention is just to, like I said, gain recognition or get a tax break, or it kind of goes unseen in a way. It's like, oh, okay, if that doesn't fit me, I don't really need to do it. Right. So the intention behind these things is so important, is of the utmost important, even if the person is like donating less. The intention can carry farther because it can have that ripple effect and impact more people and set a precedent, right? It set a standard. And so in that way, it's the most important, right? It carries that energy, it carries that sincerity that inspires others to act with the same authenticity. And the Gita tells us, these actions performed with pure intention contribute to personal growth and spiritual evolution. So it's not just best for society, which is wonderful, but it's also going to be better for you in the long run, right? And these things are so much more valuable, our personal growth, our spiritual evolution, so much more valuable than any of the temporary material pleasures that we enjoy, right? So really, it's a win-win all the way around. Even if if your goal is yourself, if you really understand what is most beneficial to yourself, then you'll act in this way, because this is what's going to contribute to your growth, your evolution, and also have that ripple effect in your life, right? As we grow, as we upgrade ourselves, our consciousness, that's what we're attracting, things of that same caliber to our life, relationships, associations, things that we do, ways that we spend our time. It's continually upgrading, which is, again, having this ripple effect, propagating effect on our lives. So that's the sincerity of intention, getting kind of deep and doing things for reasons beyond what's just right in front of us at the time that might sound good or feel good. Does anybody want to share before we move on to the next verse? Okay, we'll move on to the next verse. 325 is where we are now. 325 says, as the ignorant perform their duties with attachment to results, the learned may similarly act, but without attachment, for the sake of leading people on the right path. So now we're moving to a new little section. And when I say sections, it's like, it's easy. When you look at a chapter, it's just like dividing text up into little mini sections to kind of group them so that they're all kind of telling a message, or there's like something we're supposed to learn in that kind of series of text. So now we're moving to a new series of text. And here, okay, so Arjuna's driving question is whether to fight or not. This is what we've been talking about since we started, right? Whether he should fight or not. And at the beginning of this chapter, Krishna we talked about the 4 levels of action and renunciation, right? And when we first talked about him, we talked about him kind of as of a progressive scale, right? We talked about premature renunciation being at the bottom of that scale, and then attached action, right? And then and then a detached action, and then renunciation. That's how we talked about it. Detached action is at the top. So it's premature renunciation, attached action, renunciation, detached action. Okay, so those are the 4 levels of renunciation and action. So Krishna's talked at these various levels, but now he's moving to a level of specific concern for Arjuna. He talked about premature renunciation at the beginning. We talked about that a lot. And then he talked about attached action when you talked about kind of doing your duty. You do your duty so that you're at harmony with the cosmic arrangement, And in this way, we're, performing sacrifice, and we're in this cooperative reciprocal relationship. Right now, then he talked about mature renunciation. Was kind of the section we just talked about, by saying, even if you're at that level, you should act to set an example. Right. And now for the rest of the section, for the rest of the chapter, almost, actually, we have one more section. But now he's going to talk about how to act on the level of detached action. So he's going to talk about how to act at the level of detached action. The conclusion is, like we keep talking about, that Arjuna needs to act. That's the conclusion. And it's been the conclusion since the beginning, and since the beginning of Krishna kind of giving him instruction. And Krishna started by giving him reasons that he should fight at lower level, like we talked about, at the level of karma kanda, like we called it. So if Arjuna aspires for higher material benefits or higher planets or more opulences, he should fight, because that's gonna be to his benefit. And then we talked about how, it's his duty. If he wants to be in this cooperative relationship with the higher arrangements, with the cosmic arrangements, he should fight, right? So again, we talked about that dartboard, and it's like the target is he should fight, but Krishna is throwing darts at all angles to tell him why he should fight based off of where he's at. So wherever you are, wherever your consciousness is, he's appealing to you. He's kind of giving the reasons, right? So here, Krishna is differentiating between the action done to set an example by a detached person versus an action done by an attached person. So he's going to explain the differences of a person that's detached and is working to set an example versus a person who's attached to their action, to the results, to the fruits. And there's a difference. There's a difference, even though externally both are doing action. And that's how it looks on the outside. Both are doing action, and an example is being set by both, right? The attached person, the person that's attached to the action that they're doing, they may have a gradual elevation that, the results of what they're doing, they're going to make progress, but it's going to be gradual, right? If we're attached, and we see that in our own lives, right? If we're doing action and we're attached, we're learning lessons and we're upgrading, but it's gradual, right? We're still kind of stuck in this karmic cycle. We're still subject to the reactions of our actions. That's this karmic cycle. And in that, for whatever we're doing, there's a reaction, and we're seeing that, and we're learning from that, and we're growing. And so there's still a gradual elevation. But if a person is detached, if the person is purely detached and just acting selflessly to set an example, they may go straight to liberation, right? They may go straight back to Godhead at the end of this life. So going back to this, we talked about intent, content, and consequence, right? So what our intention is, what ends up happening, and then the consequence. So if we're analyzing a person who's acting both detached and attached, what they're doing looks the same. What they're doing looks the same, but their consequence is different. What ends up happening is different. And then here we'll talk about a detached person is wise and an attached person is unwise, right? So he's saying that externally they're similar, but internally they're different, right? Because a detached person knows, a detached person has been purified. They understand that what happens if we're attached, right? They understand that that's not really the highest. And so they're wise, and the attached are still a little bit unwise. Right. So an example will be set from both of them. So whatever actions they're doing, people will see an example will be set. But the person that's detached will lead a person towards elevation and liberation. And this won't have the same effect for someone that is attached. Right. So an attached person will be within this material existence and they'll be elevated. And an example would be like, let's talk about parenting, right? A spiritually minded person and a materialist. Say both people are super responsible and they're raising their kids and they're good examples, right? But because the people that are God-centered and are raising their kids accordingly aren't doing it in an attached manner, they're seeing their kids. They're not seeing their kids as theirs. They're seeing them as children of God. And they're trying to raise their kids from that vantage point, right? With God in the center. And this is, to be completely detached as a parent is like, a pretty high standard, but let's just say this is their intention, right? This is their intention. This is how they're trying to raise their kids. The materialistic people have no idea. They don't know anything about God, and they're responsible, but they're not raising their kids in this level of consciousness. So both are setting good examples, but the spiritually elevated parents will become liberated through their service, and the other parents, they'll be elevated to a better position in this world or heavens in the next, but they won't go straight back to Godhead, right? This is the difference between this gradual elevation and this being completely liberated, right? And again, we see this just throughout their lives. You make good decisions and it works out well for you. That's, your karma works out well when you make good decisions. So we see how this works in our lives, and this is just kind of expanding it to this world of view of what happens after this life. Right? And what happens after this life is you can continue in this material world. You can even make progress into heavenly planets. But what we want as devotees is to go back to Godhead, which is above all of that. Right? So then this begs the question, is it bad to be attached to our kids, right? Is it bad to have that attachment, right? And it's not bad, but we have to be aware that when we're attached, a possessive or controlling mentality can be created, and that can create problems in relationships. It can create tension. And like we talked about before, people can feel that on the other side. People can feel, to the degree that your love is not selfless, people can feel that, and it doesn't feel good. Their response is it's not elevating. So this whole idea is that if all I'm seeing in my relationship with you is just me and you, and there's no God in the picture, there'll be no elevation, right? I can't be elevated if there's no conception of elevation, right? So this is why when we talk about things in our life, it's like we don't have to stop anything in our life. We just need to add God to it some way. How can we dovetail it into God's service? How can we make it a little bit more about God and a little bit less about me? And in that, we can become purified and we can make progress in this life, right? But in the absence of that, we just become bound, right? We just become bound. We just become further pulled by our attachments, further subjected to this law of karma, right? And we're not making elevation. And so the ideal situation is that we have relationships in this world, but we're focused on growing relationship with the transcendence. So we have both, but the more we can dovetail our relationships in this world with God's service, with the transcendence, the more that we can make progress, the more that we can make spiritual evolution, we can evolve spiritually. So Krishna's mood here is not to devalue those that don't have as high of a consciousness. Even if they don't have as high as a consciousness, that's okay. And we've been seeing that from the beginning, because he gives us all these reasons that we should do the same action, but for different reasons, depending on where we are in our consciousness. And the reason for that is that you'll make progress, right? Even if your reason for doing what you're doing isn't the highest, if you still do what you're doing, if you still do the right thing, you'll still make progress, right? Doing the right thing for the right motive is best. But the next level down would be doing the right thing, but maybe for the not so right motive, but you're still doing the right thing. And then even lower than that would be not doing the right thing and not having any good intentions. But wherever you are in that is okay, because as long as you're doing the right thing, you're going to make progress. An example would be like a doctor. A doctor, and this is where all doctors are now in our world, is all doctors do it for money. But there was a time in the Vedic times that they did it out of responsibility. And that was like the main objective. So let's still imagine that that's the best objective as it is. You do it as a sense of care for people, as a sense of responsibility. That's your 100% main prerogative. That's the right motive, and that's the right action, right? A little bit lower than that would be doctors that are primarily just doing it for money. They're just doing it for money. They're still very responsible, but they're just doing it for their own self-interest. That's a level lower than that. Level lower than that is somebody who's in it for the money, but they aren't careful. They're just trying to clock hours. They don't really care about the quality of their work. Right? So we could see we're on this scale, all are doctors, but the highest is if you're doing it for the right reasons and you're doing it. But even if you're not doing it for the right reasons, but you're still doing it, there's still good that can come from that. So Arjuna's at the top level, and people of society are at the middle. And in this way, he's setting an example for them, right? So if a doctor who's doing it just to make money all of a sudden sees all these doctors who do it with really pure intentions, really just to care for people, and that's their primary response, that's their primary objective, then they're setting that precedent. The people at the top level are setting that precedent, and people look up to them and kind of admire them, kind of aspire to be like them. And in that way, society is pulled up. So that's why Krishna is expressing that this need to set an example in society is so important, because in the absence of it, we become degraded. If we don't have these great examples, these gold stars, or if, you say, okay, well, I'm above that now, I'm really detached from any of it, I can just run away. Best to set an example, because you could still, if you set an example, you can still positively impact society, positively impact more people. And at the same time, you'll still be elevated to the spiritual world at the end, or you'll still be elevated to God at the end. You'll still end up in the same place as you would have if you would have renounced. So that's what he's telling him here is act and do it to set an example, and furthering the reason of why, what that actually looks like to be detached, but still work as an example. Does anybody want to share anything before we move on to the next one? Okay, this next one is fun, and I hope to have some shares for this next one. Let's see what happens. 326. So 326 says, as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant man attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness. So this is a key verse in the Gita, which conveys the overall mood of Krishna. He doesn't want too much social disruption, right? So if he's saying, even if you're a wise person and you're at the highest level, there's a certain way that you talk to people that maybe aren't at your level, that are at a lower level, a certain way that you should communicate, right? Understanding that it's not possible for, if you're wise and you have a really high level understanding, and somebody's not as wise and they don't really understand so much, they don't have a lot of knowledge, it's not possible to expect that unwise person will all of a sudden just jump up here, right? That you could just tell them and they're just going to jump up here. Like, I can't just go tell my child, like, okay, I know you're crying, but you need to stop because you're not going to eat again for an hour. Like, she's not going to just understand that, right? She's not there yet, and it'll take some time for me to be able to talk to her like that, because she has to grow. Her consciousness has to evolve, right? So in the same way, we can't just expect somebody to just all of a sudden understand some of these things, right? Everybody is at an incremental path of growth. So the message here is not to, in the meantime, destroy people's worldview, right? So everyone has a worldview that gives them some kind of shelter, right? Yours is likely different than, the person that you just met at the grocery store, or, everybody has a different worldview, and it gives them some kind of shelter. And unless we're capable of just giving them another worldview that will give them shelter, like right away, it'll do more harm than good by just going in and destroying their worldview, by saying, whatever you believe is actually not really true. And this is really what's true. And then expect them to just like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I buy into that. No, because people get security out of their worldviews, right? It's giving them security in their life. We can't go up to someone who has a good job, a good family, and devalue their responsible material life, right? In efforts to try to get them to be spiritually responsible. Even if they do buy it, they may end up, even if they say, okay, yeah, that actually makes sense. None of this stuff has any meaning in my life. I might as well get rid of it all, right? They may not be ready for that. They get rid of it all. They quit everything. They're not materially responsible. They may become passive, pessimistic, lethargic. That's not healthy. They took a step they weren't really quite ready for. We talked about that before too. I actually did that when I first came into spiritual life. And when you lose that security of your current worldview and you lose it too quickly, it's like you feel very unstable, right? It's like you don't have secure ground because you have like one foot in a different worldview that you're not quite there. And then you have the other foot in this other one that you kind of just dissolved and you're just kind of trying to stay afloat. Right? So that's not really what Krishna recommends for us or for, our relationships with other people. Right? We have to respect, we have to understand that they have different worldviews. And even if they are going to, change to a different one, it's going to take time. It's a gradual process. And we have to have some grace for that, for both ourselves and for others. We don't want to disturb people's minds and leave them shelterless, right? That just brings them down, right? Maybe their shelter isn't the best shelter. Maybe they're taking shelter in something material, in a job, they think their job is the know-all, provides them all security in life, provides them all happiness. Their job, that is like their life. And we know better, we know, okay, you shouldn't really take shelter in a job because it could go away tomorrow and you will have nothing, if your entire identification is wrapped up in that. It's not very stable. We can see that and we can know that. But we can't tell them so harshly and expect them to just say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll take shelter in something that's more enduring and sustainable and long lasting, because they're just not ready for that. Right. So we don't want to, and if we did it, they either would be like, you're crazy, I'm not listening to you, and they'd make no progress, or they believe it, but it'd be too fast for them and too jolting, too jarring, and they'd be straddling those two worlds and not really quite be ready. And when I say they, I mean us or people around us. So we have to be careful with that. If we're trying to do outreach or something, the purpose is not just to tell the truth, but to tell the truth in a way that attracts people to it. Right? If people aren't attracted to it, then we're doing them a disservice. And we can talk about this from like a spiritual perspective, but even just like with our kids, if we're trying to get our kids to do something, we kind of have to package it in a way that feels good for them. And we kind of have to meet them where they're at, or they're just going to spit it right back up at us, right? So if we say things in a way that just makes people feel alienated, that's not healthy, right? Like if somebody has children and we tell them that, oh, your children are really just a source of entanglement, and when they grow up, they'll really just be sources of heartache, and therefore don't be attached. We're saying, no, don't be attached. This can make a person more negligent, not spiritually inspired. And that's such a disservice to society. So we need to act in a way that elevates people. Right? If they can be elevated quickly, that's great. But if not, let it be gradual. And more important than correcting people's philosophy is connecting with the purpose of philosophy and the purpose of life at large. Right? So people will come to spiritual life for multiple reasons. People don't necessarily come because they understand the philosophy and they're like 100% bought into it and they're like converting because the philosophy is so great, right? Gita tells us that people usually seek something else when they're coming to philosophy, right? Or when they come to spiritual life, they're seeking peace, they're seeking relief from distress or a sense of belonging, right? So if they get what they're looking for and they develop some strong emotional bond with that path and the teachers of the path, if we call their philosophy wrong or their teachers wrong, it can feel like a direct attack, right? Because they're emotionally connected to really their experience. If they experience some kind of relief or peace or transformation in their life, they kind of emotionally connected with that. So if we insult their philosophy, it can feel like a directed attack, right, to something that they consider sacred, things that have improved their quality of life, right? And then that can be confrontational, right? People can hit back. It could, they can blame us. They could be mad. They could, say throw the baby away with the bathwater. Like, okay, spiritual life isn't really for me. I know I did that when I was younger and was in a Christian church. And I felt like that, actually. I felt like I was bringing somebody around the church, and they were like not very accepting, and I felt like aren't these people aren't who they say they are, and kind of lost interest. So these things happen. So we have to be super careful of how we present what we're practicing or what we're doing, or we defeat the whole purpose of the philosophy, which is to bring people to God. That's the entire purpose of philosophy. That's the whole reason that we're here, right? It's not so that we can have more knowledge or we can be holier than thou, or it's so that we can be closer to God, and we can bring people to God. That's why we're here. And the Gita teaches us not to disturb people's minds, but to encourage them in their gradual spiritual evolution. So instead of criticizing other people's philosophical concepts, we should use our creativity to help them experience God in a deep and meaningful way. And some of us, I know a lot of us, have to do this, when our family is turned off from it, when our family's not really into spiritual life. I know there's a lot of talk on the chat about that, on our Gita chat, those of us that have families that aren't so accepting, right? And how do we do that? How do we convey that? I was just talking to Brittany. She listens a lot. And she sent me this picture. She moved her altar to her closet. And she was telling me she has these teenage boys, and she lives in like a small town in Virginia. And she just came into this a couple of years ago, but she got really into it, and she got deities, and she was telling me that her teenage boys were going to have friends over, and they were embarrassed, and they were like, "Mom, can you put away all the Krishna stuff?" Like, and she's texting me. She's like, "It totally broke my heart, but this is what I did." And she sent me this pictures of she has this walk-in closet, and half of her closet is like her new altar, and the other half is her clothes. And I was telling her, like, good for you. It's like, I'm sure that's hard. I'm sure that breaks your heart. It's the very opposite of what you want to do, right? What you want to do is say, no, kids, this is the way that it's, we're going to live, and get on board. That's what you want to say. But that's really just going to kind of turn them off more, right? If it's kind of pushed down their throat like that, if they have friends over and they do feel embarrassed, that's so she's trying to be there for her family and meeting them where they're at. And in the meantime, doing that by demonstrating, love and respect for where they are. And I thought that was a really cool thing, because I'm sure that was so hard. I'm sure that's like the opposite of what you want to do. And at the same time, as a parent, like, your heart's breaking, because all you want to do is share this with your kids, share this thing that you've experienced so much, unconditional love and peace from, and connection from, but they're not there yet. They're not there. They're really just concerned about getting acceptance from their friends. And that's okay. That's okay. We can love and respect and appreciate them and accept them in that, then maybe at some point they'll be ready for something more. And maybe not. But either way, we have to kind of be detached. We have to kind of do our best and then be detached and show them that same amount of love and acceptance regardless. And that's our duty, right? So when we're talking about our family, and how we could, show up better for them, that's how we have to do it. We have to show up by being a higher version of ourselves. So we have our standards, or the way we behave, and people have theirs. And oftentimes what we have to do is show where the two standards kind of intersect. So, where's a commonality that they can kind of relate to us, and we can kind of relate to them. We kind of have to bridge that gap. And so it has to be on their terms. Right? We say, don't tell me what you believe, show me how you behave. We've all heard that, right? It's so much more important. And when we think about the teachers that we've had in our lives, and maybe some of our teachers have been really good speakers and we've learned a lot from them. But the teachers that probably have the most profound impact on you are the ones that you really see that they're living it, that they're doing it in their life. The way that they treat you is consistent with what they're saying, right? The way that you see them navigate through life and the choices that they make, and it's consistent with what they're saying, with what they're saying. And in that, you see, what their lives are like, what kind of people they're like. And then you think, you know what, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. And that's what makes the biggest difference. It's not people that are just preaching at us, that are just telling us, this is the way you should live. This is what you should do. The knowledge only goes so deep, right? But when they're really living it, when they're really engaged in relationship with you and others, and you see this demonstrated, it's profound, right? So this is the kind of people that we want to be. And when we talk about setting an example, how important this is for setting an example and setting an example for society at large. If we have a spiritualist who's a householder, has a family house, but they're very irresponsible. They're very irresponsible to their family, to their responsibilities, but they're spiritualists. They're doing their practices, but they're not really taking care of their duties, right? Responsible householders, people that are, responsible raising their families, look at that and are not interested, right? They're like, I don't really want to be like that. Therefore, I don't really want to follow that practice, right? And then that propagates, right? It becomes like a practice of irresponsible materialist, right? Which we can't be, right? We don't want to be that. That doesn't set a good example. If everybody's that followed this practice just renounced and didn't take care of their families and just threw away their duties, and that becomes what this practice is, right? But that's what people see it as anyway. So we have to stick to our duties. We have to be responsible in this world so that we can attract people, right? So that we're not alienating groups of people, and we're setting that standard and that precedent, and not disrupting people's minds. And we don't want to disrupt people's minds. So that's what Krishna's really saying here. And this is such an important point in spirituality, that so many people, and it's so easy to glaze over. I know my husband's Catholic. I've talked about this before, and this is like, I'm very into philosophy, and I can very much get into this, like, your philosophy makes no sense. Like, whatever it is, I can very much so like want to talk about philosophy and why whose is better, right? And in fact, when we got married, even what's worse than philosophy that has holes in it, to me, I'll just be frank with you guys, is when people don't even understand the philosophy, but they're just running through the motions. Then I'm like really kind of a jerk. I'm like, okay, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And my husband wanted to do a Catholic practice or something at the wedding. This is so embarrassing. I'm sharing this with you guys, so please don't be offended. This was a long time ago too. Hopefully I would be a little bit, I am different now. I'll tell you how I'm different now after this. But then I was like, okay, if you could tell me why you want to do that, then we can do it. Such a jerk. But he's emotionally connected. Now also he's much more in the know of what he's doing and why he's wanting to do it. But he was emotionally connected to what he was doing. He had been forever. And it's like, who am I to question, what he's connected to, and how is that going to help him? It's not. It's only going to like make you feel like, oh, you're a spiritualist. Well, guess what? You're a jerk. like that doesn't feel good, right? And what are we trying to do? Bring people to God consciousness, or like prove that we're right and we're better, right? Now he wants to get our baby baptized. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand that. That's fine. We can get our baby baptized. It's still like, she can choose what path she wants. And I actually feel like this is big progress on my part. I feel, just to, like pat myself on the back. But I genuinely feel like if she chose that path and she had a relationship with God, I'd be happy. That's really all that I want for her. If she didn't, it would break my heart, but I would understand. I'd have to understand that it's her karma, and I can't push that. But yeah. So this is something for us to think about in our relationships with our family and people that are close to us, and how we approach it, because it's so delicate and it can make such a big difference with them. Does anybody want to share anything before we move on to the next point? Leonie, please share.
Yeah, what you were talking about reminded me of something. You know, when I came back from India, my husband felt a bit like alienated. And we got into this conversation, and I was like sharing a lesson I learned from my teacher. And wisdom is shared. See what resonates with you. So if it doesn't resonate with you, you know, leave it. Don't get in resistance, and it's just not meant for you right now. So it's always something I tell my students as well. And yeah, because the meeting of the heart can only be there when we don't judge, but understand from where we are right now. And it's the willingness to listen to each other. I think that's the important thing. Because if you're saying like, but I know it better, you're not willing to listen to the other person, right? So.
Yeah. No, that's so beautiful. And that's really, again, the point of the philosophy, like what we're all doing here. We're all trying to be more God conscious. And what is God conscious? Like if we're really thinking about God more throughout our day, if we're more God conscious, if it's more on our consciousness, then naturally we're going to be imbibing more godly qualities. We're going to be more loving, more compassionate, more accepting, all of the things that Leonie said, that even by like the tone of her voice, I felt the energy of those things. That's what we're going to imbibe, and that's what people are going to feel off of us. And if we're committed to a philosophy, but we're not those things, people are going to see, even if we can't, how effective is that philosophy actually, if that's, but that's what they spend their whole life doing, but they're still showing up as a jerk. They're still not accepting, they're not respecting my space, or my opinions or my thoughts or ideas or what's important to me. They're not respecting any of those things. That's not love. That's not, that doesn't feel like this unconditional love that they talk that they have. If they have it, why aren't they giving it to me? This doesn't make sense, right? I've been on both sides of that. I'm sure a lot of us here have as well. And just to be more mindful of where we are. And if we can be more mindful and we can be more deliberate and intentional, we may not be to that high level yet where all this love and acceptance is just spilling out all over the place all the time, right? It may be spilling out a lot, but maybe not 100% of the time. But if we can find those spots where it's not, and we could try to upgrade, and in the meantime, increase our God consciousness, practice these principles more, and get more committed to our spiritual practices, our chanting, our reading, our meditations, however we're connecting with God, we could, make that progress and work it from both sides. And that's really what we need to do. That's really the process, right? So the other point is to know when to give others space and know when to push them. And in the same way, if someone encroaches on our personal space by coming too close to us, like physically, we feel uncomfortable. But similarly, we feel uncomfortable when someone intrudes into our personal psychological space by mandating what we should or shouldn't do, or how we should or shouldn't feel, right? That's what I did in that example with my wedding and my husband, right? This is what we should do. And if you can't come up to here, then I'm not interested in doing it. Right? That's like abrupt, especially like in a wedding ceremony, like a marriage where it's like supposed to be about like compromise and, meeting each other, and it's like just I can't even imagine my poor husband. Somehow he got more inspired, so hopefully that was just like a one-off. But yeah, he tolerates a lot. So anyway, when we do that, we have to be mindful when we're pushing people past where they're comfortable going, or where they're not ready to go yet. Even if we have the best intentions, right? Even if we have the best intention, it may just be too much for people. right? People will feel suffocated. They may be even more inclined to make bad choices. Like when you have those helicopter parents that are like all over their kids. And even if their intentions are good, even if they're trying to protect them and keep them safe, and, if they can't somehow meet them where they are in some regard, it just feels oppressive. It feels like I can't wait to get out of here and make my own choices, right? And then oftentimes their own choices are like not good for them, but they're so tired of being so oppressed, they're like, there you go, crazy, right? That happens. So we have to be mindful, and sometimes that might take a little bit of compromise on our end. Sometimes that might take a little bit of letting go, a little bit of detachment, a little bit of understanding that other people have their own karmas and their own journeys, and our job is not to come in and control that or to dictate that or facilitate that. Our job is really just to support that and inspire them in uplifting themselves. Right? That's the limit of the control that we really have. If we want to have the highest impact on them, the best we can do is just love them for who they are and love them for who they aren't, and try to inspire them to be a higher, better version of themselves by being a higher and better version of ourselves. And that's it. That's the impact that we could have. And you could see that as a limited impact, but if you can really get committed to your own personal growth and evolution, it could be a limitless impact, really, right? How somebody that's inspired by another person can respond, right? What their capabilities can be, versus if they're doing it out of fear or out of fear of rejection or wanting to be accepted, or they feel forced in some way, right? What kind of impact is that going to have to their character? So that's kind of what we have to imbibe. And then we can talk about another lesson here is to be discerning, but not to be judgmental. And this is a really important point, right? Part of being responsible. Denny says, I'm inspired by everyone on here. The group is really inspiring. I totally agree. I totally agree. So we talk about be discerning, but not judgmental. We talk, part of being responsible is being discerning. We talk a lot about, it's offensive to blaspheme a person, to say bad things about a person. We don't want to talk bad about people. But at the same time, we do have to be discerning, right? We have to be able to discern between our association, between people that we want to spend a lot of time with. We have to discern between, if we're picking a partner, we have to be discerning. So we talk about this difference between being discerning and being judgmental. Actually, I was just having this conversation with somebody a couple of days ago. They asked me, you probably come across a lot of different people on this path, and some people maybe you don't want to be as close with, and some people you click with more, and how do you navigate that? And what I told them, what I do is, if I'm experiencing a person that I'm like, I don't really feel like I jive with this person. I don't know that we really have a lot in common. I don't know that I really want to spend a lot of time with them. I try to find something good about them, something that I admire about them. Like maybe they're really committed to their kirtan. Maybe they're really good at kirtan and they're really committed to kirtan, and I see them inspire and uplift a lot of people in their kirtan. I see that, and I really appreciate that about them. But at the same time, I kind of build my personal boundaries, my psychological or physical boundaries, such that I'm not so entangled with them. I'm not in a relationship with them where I'm struggling with a certain thing that they do, or I could just kind of respect them from afar. And in that way, I can keep myself from being offensive. I can keep myself from focusing on this one thing that they do that drives me crazy. And in that, we can maintain healthy relationships with everybody. If we understand that, I don't have to be best friends with everybody. I don't have to force this relationship, or I don't, we can have people that we're really close with, that we're best friends with, that we share everything with. We can have people that, we're maybe acquaintances with. We could have people that, we could have all different rungs of familiarity with people. But we should always at the core keep that appreciation that we have of that person, wherever they are on that rung, on that circle. We should know what we appreciate about them. And we should keep that at the forefront. And we should only get so close to them is that we're not creating these offenses, right? And that's different for everybody, because as we get more close to people, as we get closer in relationship, we see more of their conditioning, we see more of their flaws, we see more of the things that trigger us, right? And so we have, if we're in a relationship and we can navigate that with them in a way that's inspiring to us both, great. But if not, then maybe better just to be on the peripheral and appreciate them for what you can, and leave the rest. And that's okay, knowing that we don't have to be best friends with everybody. So practically, that's a way to handle it. But what we really want to get to, the gold standard, and this is what the Gita teaches us, is seeing that everybody is a part and parcel of God, right? Everybody is the exterior, the way their behavior, their way they're thinking, whatever that thing that they're doing that's driving you crazy, is just a product of their conditioning, and it's not really them. And their real identity is a spirit soul, and that's what we should really be connecting with. That can never annoy us. That can never trigger us. That can, that's what we really want to get to, a point where we see that in them. And the more that we can, detach from our own body, our own makeup, our own judgments, the more that we can detach from theirs, the more that we can see them for what they are. And that's the work that we're doing here. So again, we're doing what's practical. We're doing what's practical so that we can stay in our lane. But at the same time, we're understanding the gold standard, and we're making steps to try to get there, so that and maybe the two kind of converge as we're getting there safely. Right? So we're okay. The big thing though from this verse I really want to get across is this gradual process, that it's okay to take gradual process. We can't expect a person to go from here to here. We understand that it's gradual process. We have grace for ourselves and for them in the process, and we let it be what it is, right? If we bring this back to Arjuna, he's fighting the war with the understanding of the bigger picture. Right? He understands the way the universe works, and he has a higher consciousness. Others may not be fighting with the same higher consciousness, but at least they're fighting. Right? So if Arjuna leaves because he has a higher consciousness, and the others leave and they have a lower consciousness, they start fleeing, society will be left with no protectors. So Krishna is saying Arjuna needs to do his duty and fight, do it diligently, and by your words or actions, don't disrupt people's minds. That's this whole class in a nutshell. So that's what I have for today. Does anybody want to share anything before we? Mariah, you are able to share. Wonderful.
Yeah, I just got back from dropping her off at school. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I have a little bit of like a raspy voice today. But I just want to say I love this class, and I am like, it's just clarifying so many things in my life. Like, you brought up how in our movement, so many people just like falsely renounced, and it was so like kind of traumatizing to so many of us within the society, because, a lot of these families just broke apart in the name of renunciation. And so I'm loving how you're like categorizing like this, premature renunciation, attached action, mature renunciation, and then detached action. And I'm also like reflecting on my life, how I've acted in different of these ways. Maybe not mature renunciation, I've never been there, but I'm seeing how I'm coming into more detached action, especially in my parenting and just like so many things. And I'm just like remembering like how when you just add Krishna, you really can act in that detached action way. When you remember Krishna and you remember that the ultimate goal of life is to get back to Godhead, to reestablish our relationship with Krishna, then like you can, and then you start doing the process of like, adding, japa or offering prashadam, or just like adding Krishna in those little moments. I'm seeing how it's like trickling in to even my daughter's life now. And I'm seeing her and I's relationship like completely transforming from just a few years ago, when I was definitely still in attached action and going through my own just unresolved pain of so many things. And it's just like, it's amazing to see how when you get to that point of more detached action, how actually it's even more joyful. Like, it's like, and it's like, it's amazing. I don't know. It's only a feeling. But then I wanted to add also, in giving God consciousness, it's how we make people feel. Like, that's more or less what you're saying towards the end here. And that made me think of Jayananda and how someone came to the temple and they saw that Jayananda was just like joyfully taking the trash out. And and they were like, man, I want to be part of this movement, just because they saw that Jayananda was joyfully taking the trash out. Like, they were like, if someone's that happy taking the trash out, I want to be part of that. And so it is like, a lot of people come not because of the philosophy, but because of how it makes them feel. And then the last thing I want to say, you're talking about this gradual process, and I started reading Mother Sukhavah's book. It's called Finding the Gap. I don't know if any of you have known of Sukhavah. She's a great devotee down in New Vrindavan. She's been through a lot of she does a lot of transformational work and counseling and stuff. And just last night I was reading, I started again from the beginning. And I love this part because she says, imagine you're on the top floor of an apartment building and there's 3 stories to go down, and you're on the balcony and you're staring at the ground and you say, I want to get to that ground, but you're at the balcony. How do you get to the ground? And it's like conversation style. So the people are answering, well, you could jump, or you could walk down the stairs, or, they're like saying all these ways. And hold on, where am I at here? I had it saved. And then she basically says, well, you should, she was like, but if you're like lamenting, I want to be on the ground, but I'm on the balcony. I want to be on the ground, but I'm on the balcony. I don't want to be here, but I want to be there. And she's relating this to spiritual life. Like, we're here in the material world, we're upset, we're suffering, but we want to be in the spiritual world. How do we get there? Do we jump? Do we just, do we take the leap? What do we do? And then eventually she was like, and you're not actually anywhere. So you have to accept where you're at. You're on the balcony, and then you have to go deep within and slowly take the steps going down to get to the ground. And I just love that analogy. I'm kind of butchering it right now because there's more to it, but I love that analogy because it just shows how it is. It's that gradual process of taking those steps one at a time, but you have to stay grounded. You can't just jump and forget everything and leave it. You're going to get hurt or you're going to fall down. So I don't know. I'm just loving this class because it's just so practical, and it's just, you can really apply it, and you can really see how just false renunciation is just like, it's detrimental. It's detrimental to people's lives, Yeah. So that's all I have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariah. Thanks for your share. I'm so happy we got to hear from you. Thank you. Okay, friends. Well, that's all that we have today. What day is it? Monday. We'll see you on Thursday. Thank you all.
Hare Krishna.
Bye.